Welcome to Synergy 21. My name is Andrew Makinga, and I am your host of this afternoon. I'm a radio DJ, a journalist, but also a presenter of Synergy 21, organized by the Dutch Research Council. And we usually focus on social sciences and humanity. And with that frame in our mind, today we want to explore and look at possible future societies, digital societies. How would they look? And can we look at the individual and at the collective and pay them good attention? That's what we're going to try and do this afternoon. We'd also like to underscore the importance of scientific research and knowledge development and how that all relates to our shared future. And I'm in the Netherlands here, in The Hague. And that future, the European Union, is very important, whether you like it or not. There's a lot of debate and discussion about that European Union. And this afternoon, with Caroline de Gruyter, NRC columnist in the Netherlands, and 4 distinguished scholars as panelists, we will discuss our relationship with the European Union. And especially, what can social sciences and humanities do within that framework? Interested? Stick around, because there's more to come. Later on today, Professor Shoshana Zuboff and Lynette Taylor will enlighten us about the future of the data economy. Believe me, there is no escaping it. We are living in the digital revolution. And last but not least, this afternoon, we will have PhD candidates, and they're all fighting for the Synergy Award 2021. And that is an award that is based on the best research-based idea that can actually help society with positive impact. Now, you might be thinking, I'm behind my computer, what can I do? Well, Andrew has a solution, but you need to work for it. Please let us know if you have ideas, suggestions, want to join us in the debate. Go to the chat. You can chat with other participants, use the hashtag Synergy21, or you could just go to the right-hand side of your screen and go to the Q&A tab, and you can enter the discussion with us. I must say, the more that you join us, the more difficult it will be for us to give you all a voice, but we will see your comments, and we have a moderator here in the studio who will pick some of the questions and comments that I can then bring to our panelists or our distinguished guests. I hope you're up to par. Keep on checking us out. Let's start the discussion. Yes, our first guest today is no other than Europe correspondent for the NRC, currently based in Oslo, columnist for the Dutch newspaper NRC Handelsblad. She has covered, Caroline, European politics for the past 20 years, previously based in the Gaza Strip, Jerusalem, Brussels, Geneva, and Vienna, and is a regular contributor for the Carnegie Europe and a member of the European Council of Foreign Relations. Her upcoming book is about Habsburg's Empire and the European Union. Caroline, where are you?
I am here.
Hello, Caroline. Thank you for being with us this afternoon.
Thank you for having me. Very nice.
I would like to give the, floor, but let me say the digital floor to you.
Thank you, Andrew. On a cold winter day, during the second lockdown, I believe, or maybe it was the third, I've lost count, I was sitting on my couch reading The Europeans, which is a splendid book by Orlando Figes that tracks Europe's cultural history. He does this through the lives of a Spanish opera singer, a French art critic, and a famous Russian novelist, all in the 19th century. While I was reading, a lot of things were happening outside. President Trump, still in power, was punishing European companies working on Nord Stream 2, the pipeline in Europe. Turkey started drilling in Greek waters, Navy boats circling Greek islands. Russia was hacking the Norwegian parliament. The EU, which had always loved free trade, started screening foreign investments suddenly. Frontex, the new European border guard, was accused of pushing back refugees in the Mediterranean. And to top it all off, Brexit negotiations at that time were getting nastier by the day. Looks like Europe is getting borders, I thought. And then I read in Figes' book about the French Marquis de Custine, who lived in the 18th century. Many French were unhappy with their rulers, and they wanted more power for the people. But Custine feared upheavals, and he was dead against it. He argued that countries outside of Europe were doing very well without democracy. And so he traveled to Russia to prove it. 6 weeks later, he was already back in Paris, having changed his mind completely. Everything about Russia filled him with dread. The despotism of the Tsar, whom we met several times, the lack of individual liberty and human dignity, the corruption, the contempt for truth, the servility of the aristocracy, and their pretentious manners, which were just a thin cover, Custine thought, for their Asiatic barbarism. I really wish all Europeans could read Custine's book on this Russia trip, La Russie en 1839. Because by traveling to Russia, he discovered how European he was. You only know who you are if you know who you are not, he argued. So, if ever you're discontented with society, travel to Russia. Whoever has examined that country, he wrote, will be content to live anywhere else. Now, something along those very lines is happening in Europe now. Europe is drawing borders, external borders, borders between us and them. We're screening foreign investments. Because of the corona pandemic, we've closed EU borders for travelers from outside. We're pushing back refugees and so on. This is a physical development, but of course it will have psychological and political implications. Clearly, Europe is entering a new phase. During the Cold War, Europe was essentially Western Europe, small, boring, deeply embedded in the Western Alliance. We had clear borders, but we would never have drawn them that way because there were also Europeans on the other side. When the Berlin Wall came down in 1989, we went to the other extreme. We demolished borders. We started exploring inclusiveness, diversity, personal freedom. Europe was no longer boring. It became an enormous space that we could all roam around in. These were the years of enlargement. But at the same time, Europeans started to ask difficult questions. Where does this end? Will Turkey become a member? And how would that change Europe? Politicians didn't answer those questions. They didn't have the answers themselves. And as a result, the questions got only louder. And populists stepped in with easy answers. What we see today is the reaction. Europe is becoming a place now. From a space, it becomes a place. It was the French Jesuit and philosopher Michel de Certeau who coined the distinction between those two, between place and space, in his book L'invention du quotidien, the practice of everyday life. A place. Europeans feel vulnerable to terrorists, uncontrolled migration, or angry, unreliable neighbors like Russia. Or even, look at those vaccine wars during the past few weeks, even afraid of the UK. We are also discussing European defense suddenly. We support Greece, basically telling Turkey that it won't become a member. So there we draw a border too. We're contradicting the US on China. We're drawing up new rules for internet giants from overseas. And in Brussels, the talk of the town is strategic autonomy. Borders, protection. That's what this is all about. Europeans have had enough of roaming around, of exploring freedoms. Now they want a nest. Politicians work on it so they can get that nest. L'Europe qui protège, a completely new development. This will have interesting ramifications. Let me briefly mention a few of those. First ramification, Europeans are still unhappy with the EU, with the way it functions, but they're increasingly happy in the EU. Polls are showing this. People are happy or happier than before with the fact that their country is a member of the club. After Brexit, Trump, and Putin, many populists have stopped calling for exits. Have you noticed that? They have their eyes on Brussels now. They don't want to leave Europe anymore. They want to change it from the inside. They're investing in European politics instead of only in national politics. Clearly, this is a new ballgame. This takes real politics to Brussels, to Europe, at last. The second ramification of Europe building borders is that the sharp distinction between nationalists and cosmopolitans is somewhat diminishing, because cosmopolitans are now advocating borders too. Third, the EU will get a new role, again. For the US, European integration was all about having a strong Western buffer against communism. But for us, integration has always had an important internal function. No more war in Europe, never again. What we did in the 1950s was to stop shooting with munition and start shooting with words instead, just words. We perfected that art in a way and became rich in the process. Instead of fighting wars, we became the world's foremost pacifists. Now, for the first time since the 1950s, we must look outward more. We must formulate policies to manage our relations with the outside world, with third countries. This is extremely difficult. Look at Brexit. This is a mercantile world where power reigns, where everything is weaponized. Refugees, data, energy, and yes, vaccines too. Again, I think of Christine. It is when looking at others that you realize who you are and what you must do. The fourth and last ramification that I will mention here is about European values. They are at the heart of many debates and political battles in Europe nowadays. I think it's part of this new phase too. Because after many crises, like the Euro crisis, the refugee crisis, Brexit, where we emphasized our differences, now we start licking our wounds. We ask ourselves, what is it that unites us? European values are part of the answer. The irony is, of course, that this leads to more division. But having looked away for many years, we must go through this somehow. Let me now wrap up by saying this new Europe, this changing Europe with more solid external borders and maybe a bit more solid European identity too, will keep us all busy for years to come. In Europe, in the Netherlands, in many sections of society, including academia. I am very much looking forward to your comments and your ideas. What Christine did and what Europe is doing too, to a certain extent, by erecting borders, is articulating fears and sometimes even prejudices. Now is the time to understand more what this all entails. There is a clear role for us here, us journalists and academics, so that in the future we may fear less. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Caroline de Gruyter. Heartfelt, beautiful, a speech a politician could have made in the center of the European Union. We will discuss it with academics here, and I'm joined by no other than Cees van Beers, Professor of Innovation Management and the head of the section Economics of Technology and Innovation at the TU Delft, and is also one of the co-leaders of the Leiden Delft Erasmus Center for Frugal Innovations in Africa. The main focus of his research is on inclusive business models and economic development. Thank you for being with us. Also with me today is Assistant Professor of Political Theory and European Politics at Leiden University and Associate Researcher at the Center for European Studies Sciences Po in Paris, Tom Theuns, and he's also the winner in 2020 of the Veni Grant from the Dutch Research Council for his project Protecting Democracy in Europe. Welcome. And last but not least, joined by Professor Liesbeth van der Grift, Professor in International History and the Environment at Utrecht University, where she leads the VIDI project, Consumers on the March, which studies the role of public interest groups and bottom-up mobilization in the history of European governance. Academics, with me. Caroline is joining us in the discussion, obviously, but can we just get to what she said? I said it was heartfelt. It was a speech a politician could have given to warm us up for Europe. But these are my thoughts. What do you have to say, Liesbeth?
I fully agree. I've been an admirer of Caroline's work for quite a while, and I think she makes a really important contribution to public debates, where she enlightens citizens about the European Union, about its functioning, and also, which I very much like as a historian, there's a very clear historical perspective in her work, and I fully second that is really important. Yeah. To enhance the quality of public debate on the European Union, on the future of the European Union in the Netherlands.
But there's a lot in her speech to unpack, and as a historian, the word division was said, borders, we want a nest. Can you say anything about some specifics that she said because you cannot agree on everything. There must be
I don't agree on everything. No. So. Well, what I note is that Caroline has a strong focus on the geopolitical dimension of the European Union, on its external affairs. What I'm missing a little bit in her story is the question of, so how do we get there? How do we make sure that citizens become more engaged and actually own the European Union as a polity to which they belong? And I think for that, what is needed is really an informed citizenry as a precondition of a public sphere, meaning that I see it as my own role as a historian to help people understand where the European Union comes from, why it functions in some respects and not at all in others, why is it good at regulating and not so much at solving political crises, for instance, to then move on to the question of where is it that we want to go, what are we satisfied with, and what do we want to change. And most importantly, also to ask the question, so are the structures and mechanisms in place for that change, or do we need to change that? And then for citizens to sort of answer themselves the question of, so what is, for instance, the political party or the organization that I would want to be part of in order to actually create that change?
But let's stick to informed. In this second decennium of a digital revolution, I think it was 1% of the information was digitalized in 1986. Professor Shoshana Zuboff told me that earlier this week. The interview will be later this afternoon. And by 2007, it was like 97%. How can we be informed if there's such an explosion of information and maybe disinformation and polarization as a result of that?
Well, I think that still elementary and high schools are a very important forum to discuss European politics with students. I've recently participated in a seminar with high school teachers, and what they said is actually there's no room, no place in the curriculum as we teach it to discuss the European Union, whereas it has become so entangled with national politics. There's so many policies that have European frameworks but are then sort of carried out on the national level. Right. But in this curriculum, it's about the treaty the Treaty of Rome and then the Treaty of Maastricht, and in between there's no European Union politics discussed, whereas what we see if we look at the history of the European Union, actually to an increasing degree the lives of citizens are being impacted by European policies. And secondly, I'll just make this point, citizens are also beginning to actually influence those European policies.
Maybe we can get back to that and the structures, but gentlemen, I would also ask you to react on Caroline's words.
I could start in much the same way. I've been a fan of Caroline's work for a long time, and I think it's crucial really to have voices like hers in journalism and in intellectual life, making links between history, between academics, between citizens, thinking through Europe, which is something that isn't always easy, and it's something that isn't always popular. I think perhaps to anticipate your next question, one point in which her and my analysis are slightly different with this regard is, on the question of borders, it is true, and she's absolutely right, that borders in Europe are coming up. But they're not all coming up in the same places, and they're not all coming up to the same heights. We sometimes confound European Union politics with European politics, right? Caroline mentioned Brexit and Britain, but no matter what Farage might have wanted, Britain is no less a country in Europe than it was before. It's not a member of the European Union, exactly. Right? The borders between the European Union member states and Britain have become complicated, but will continue to be extremely porous. The border between, let's say, Greece and Turkey, that's becoming much less porous, both in terms of concretely of people being able to cross it freely, but also in terms of this mentality, in terms of this othering and so forth. So I think that there are multiple processes going on. And in fact, the divisions and the distinctions between European Union member states and countries and non-member state countries, while important, are for me and in my research overshadowed by increasing distinctions within European Union member states.
Okay. I think we should continue because I see Caroline is taking notes, so we will get back to you. And if you're at home or at work, Synergy21 is the hashtag, or get to the Q&A button on the right hand of your screen, right side of your screen. Cees van Beers, Professor Innovation Management and Head of the Section Economics and Technology and Innovation at TU Delft. What were your first thoughts when you heard Caroline?
Yeah, well, I can team up with the other two because I think it was definitely a heartfelt column what I just listened to. But I was also thinking at that time, I'm not so surprised that the borders are coming up, because when we're going back in history, although I'm not an historian, but when we go back in history, if you look when in 1957 European Community was established, then that was mainly aimed at trade liberalization between the member states. And the European Union started, European Community, I have to say, it was not the European Union at that time, started as a customs union. And a customs union means that you abolish all the trade tariffs between the members. But in order to survive, you have to come up with a common external tariff towards non-members. That means basically that you are already discriminating to non-members. We gained a lot from that. And therefore, I think it's not a big issue if you say we discriminate against non-members. When the European Community became European Union, it became a common market, then we did not only have free movements of goods and commodities, but also of people. And I think people, that's more a diverse thing. When you talk about workers, about people who can move freely through the European Union, but also from Africa into the European Union, or from other places outside the European Union into the European Union. If you have to deal with these things, and border comes up, then you run into a much more bigger discussion on ethics, social sciences, and so on.
Yes, Caroline. Bill Clinton once said the borders of this new world are more like nets than walls, but still we are erecting borders. What do you have to say after hearing our panelists?
Good points, all of you. Thank you. I would say to Tom that maybe you have noticed, but I often don't talk about the EU anymore. I often talk about Europe, because look, I've lived in Geneva. I'm now living in Oslo. In many ways, the Norwegians, who are not members of the EU, but in many other ways, have more projects together with EU countries than the UK ever had when it was a member, belongs to that Europe too. So I said the outside borders, the external borders are closed, almost closed. Because of Corona, well, Norway is inside. And in many other ways, Norway is part of the bigger animal, let's say. So yes, sometimes the external border is not just around the EU, but around Europe more. And the question is, we see this with Brexit too, who belongs to that and who doesn't. This is more or less Cees's point as well. In my new book, comparing the Habsburg Empire with the European Union, this exactly plays a role as well. Education, I think, is completely crucial. I learned the difference between the European Commission and the European Council when I moved to Brussels in order to work there. And I think this is ridiculous, really. Everybody emphasizes all the time how powerful Brussels is and so on. At the same time, we know nothing about it. We had a Minister of Foreign Affairs once, Hans van Mierlo, and he, as far as I know, was the only one who sort of was preparing a draft proposal to include Europe in our basic education. What is it? What isn't it? Because often the discussions that we have, as Liesbeth says, are not real discussions. People have opinions and very little knowledge about how Europe works. So I couldn't agree more with her point.
You agree.
As well.
Kees, you also have a perspective when it comes to technology, because this afternoon is also about possible digital futures. And because time is not our best friend, so we can never really go into it the way we want to. But what do you have to say about the digital future of Europe?
Well, the digital future is affecting all countries, not only the European Union. But I think when you look at what happened, say, since the 1990s, the European Union and also many other countries in the world have been exposed to technological shocks. And also that leads to all kinds of changes in society and also in the, I would say, the perception of people. People get more information when we talk about digital technologies, and we talked already about that. And what you see, I think, the European Union is, when we talk about digital technologies, a bit on the backside in the sense that they do a good job by being a dominant player in setting standards for a lot of things. But when we look where digital technologies and also the technologies that we can expect in the near future, artificial intelligence, quantum technology, a lot of things are going on, then I think the European Union as a producer is not on top of it. These are the United States and China. And it is important because nowadays welfare is not dominantly generated by trade liberalization, as I said before, but more about technology production and technology use. And there are all kinds of geopolitical consequences of that with regard to who is getting the data, what kind of privacy policies are relevant, and so on.
And what can, I'm looking at Liesbeth, you spoke about structures that we might need. What structures do we need to guide this process in the right way? Because Shoshana Zuboff is even more negative than you are. She says it's a disaster in America, and at least Europe is trying to do something. So what type of structures do we need if we want to govern this changing world?
Well, the point is some structures are in place.
Okay.
So I think what a lot of people don't know and don't realize is that the European Union is actually quite an open system of political decision making, in the sense that there has been, especially from the 1970s onward, many opportunities for interest groups, for public interest groups to participate and to exert influence. The question, of course, is to what extent does that produce the desired results, outcome, consequences. And I think there interesting research can be done and should be done. And I'm actually one of the people working on a project that attempts to create some insights into what the role of such public interest groups has been. Ideally, the idea is that public interest groups can play an important role in sort of acting as mediators between, Brussels, the Brussels machinery, what has been decided there, and then, go back to their constituencies, to their members. And I'm talking about, a large variety of organizations, like environmental organizations, trade unions, employers' organizations, really professionals,
Are you saying that
scientists.
we're actually blind to the good work that has already been done by a lot of bottom-up movements?
No, that's not what I'm saying, because whether good work has been done or whether that work should be assessed as not so good is not my primary objective. My objective is to see to what extent they have been able to act as intermediaries, so to report back, basically, to inform, to tell citizens, to tell their members, look, this is what we did when we were in Brussels. This was the position that we took. We influenced policy outcomes, and this is the reason why we did this. Are you satisfied with this? If not, we go back to Brussels and sort of renegotiate.
Okay.
And I think, and that has not necessarily to do with the fact that these organizations have not wanted this, but it has a lot to do with the very technical nature of European policy making, which requires, if you want to participate, really to be on top of things, invest a lot of time and energy, which these organizations not always have.
Yeah, Tom, the digital future, do you worry, like Cees, about the weakness, possible weakness of the European Union?
I suppose I'm a little bit more mixed, perhaps because I don't spend so much time thinking about innovation and the production of innovation in Europe. I guess to bring things back to something that Caroline said earlier, one of the main worries is security with this regard, right? So security of information, security of digital information. We talk about data privacy, for example, but also more straightforwardly interference from Russia, from other actors in political decision-making and so forth. I think these are things that are extremely important, but that actually Europe is rather well equipped to deal with.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then on the other side, I think it's very interesting what the European Union is doing to try to protect, for example, data privacy and to resist the total monopolization by certain big tech firms of our online life.
Back to you in a second, Caroline, but I do want to know from your different perspectives, from your academic perspective, what do you think the social sciences or the humanities can do within the context of our digital future case? Because you are worrying, but maybe you have suggestions about how science can play a role in guiding that process.
Yes, I think that. Well, I think what is relevant, of course, that social sciences and humanities have a role in itself to play, of course, because they have their own ideas and objects of studies. But at the same time, what you see now, the very fast changes in technologies that's coming up leads to basically a total change also in society, in the way we communicate, in the way we behave. And I think social sciences has a huge role to take a look at that, to investigate that, in order to make these new technologies be working properly for not only for economic growth, but also for the welfare of people. Because if you don't do that, then technology can run in a certain way that you end up in a dystopic society.
Dystopic society, Caroline de Gruyter.
Well, I think we always need to keep a good balance between innovation on the one hand, to have a society where people can be creative, and at the same time, protection. So we need to have the right regulation in place. We saw this with the euro crisis, with the financial crisis. Now we have it in the digital sphere as well. Sometimes we have more space for innovation, but then something goes wrong and we go for more protection. So I think now we're clearly in a phase where we want more protection. To Liesbeth's point, actually, there are a lot of lobbyists in Brussels, but there are lots of citizen lobbyists as well. Indeed, this was one of my big surprises when I lived and worked in Brussels. How the Commission, but you don't see this because it doesn't happen in public, how they try to listen not only to industry when they make new draft laws, but also to all kinds of citizens groups. And what struck me each time is that people have the feeling they don't know where to go. But actually there is a lot of room for citizens and for their input. The only thing is they need indeed intermediaries like citizen lobbyists who tell them ring the bell at that door or at the other door.
That's what they need. You agree?
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree, and I mean, I agree to the point that I actually think that the terms lobbyists, interest groups versus sort of citizen lobbyists or civil society organizations, that they are sort of obscuring the fact that there are just lots of organizations representing groups of people, some more corporate and some more public interest, but actually, you know, some started as a group of citizen lobbyists and then, you know, changed into professional sort of protest organizations. I think it's important to see the large variety of those groups that are active there and trying to influence and the extent to which they are successful. So I fully agree with you that is a very important point to make clear to citizens that these opportunities exist. At the same time, I'm also critical because you know, access is very unequal in Brussels. So you know, some organizations, firms, most importantly, have more access and more resources than others, and this has not really been formalized. So whereas in the case of the United Nations, for instance, there are clear criteria on what you need to do in order to become consulted. In the case of the European Union, it's mostly the European Commission that decides whom to invite and whom to exclude. So I think there, you know, in terms of the structures and the mechanisms, the institutions in place, things could be improved.
Tom Theuns, you know everything about European politics, nearly everything. I want to know, before we end, from your academic perspective, how does Europe play a role in the future? How do you, where does it fit in? Do you sense that there's a lot going on? Do you think that there's something missing? Now is the time that we can actually put it on the table.
So I have the luck and the pleasure to be a political theorist, not a social scientist, and therefore I don't spend my time trying to wonder what's going to happen, but rather trying to figure out if we're going in a direction which is promising, if other directions could be better.
Are we going in a direction that's promising?
I think Europe, we are walking towards a clash, a conflict. Borders are coming up, certainly. I think Carolina's column was very eloquent on that. And that also creates a sort of pressure cooker, whereby certain increasing divisions within Europe, such as the democracy-autocracy distinction. We now have European Union member states who are not democracies, Hungary, Poland, etc. But also other cultural distinctions are becoming more important because we are forced by certain crises and by the firming of certain borders to work more closely together, or at least to be packed more closely together. So we're walking towards a sort of clash. Where that clash will end up is still open, and I think it's a very interesting time for European citizens to realize that the European Union is not something which happens in Brussels, which is external to them, which is a bureaucracy alone, although it is all of those things as well. But we are the European Union. You are, I am, we're European Union citizens, and the European Union acts in important ways in our name. It's these processes of representation that Liesbeth was talking about that we need to figure out. How to make sure that the laws in which we are subjected nationally and supranationally correspond to the vision of politics that we want to further in Europe.
Thank you so much. I'm looking at the time, and we've run out of time, which is, Caroline, in short, do you have something to say before we end this discussion after everything that has been said? Because we have some questions coming up, or shall I go to the first question and then we can see?
Look, if we're running out of time, just go to the questions straight.
Because I don't want to let the people down. Thank you all for joining us in this short debate about Europe and our relationship with Europe. A couple of comments and questions. Let's see. What can social sciences and humanities contribute to the national debate on Europe? That's basically something I've been asking. I've asked it 3 or 4 times, but shall I ask it again? And do we have something to add?
Well, I do hope that we've made a number of points towards answering this question.
No, but maybe the question is not what can social sciences and humanities do, but is how are the social sciences and humanities engaged with Europe? Is it something...
There's something about Anouk's question, which I think is really interesting.
Yeah.
So
you want to go to Anouk's question?
that's the one that was asked.
Yeah.
There's these different visions of Europe, right? We were talking about this earlier as well. There's a technocratic Europe who works in Brussels and who's kind of far from citizens' interests and estranged sometimes from citizens' interests. And then there's the idea of Europe as something we're doing together. I think that also reflects in what the social sciences and humanities can do when thinking about Europe, right? Sometimes the temptation has been to think of social sciences and humanities as sciences that can inform the elite, the decision makers, and in that sense, contribute to, let's say, output legitimacy, to good governance. I think there's also an interesting alternative, which is that social sciences and humanities, just as we were discussing before, that they work to creating a public sphere, where the citizens are the ones who are informed, and that they take ownership and control over what processes are done in their name.
And with regards to that, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I just, a thought came up about the question about the national debate. What I thought was really striking after the results with regard to the Brexit referendum were published was the fact that, farmers in Cornwall had to a large majority voted in favor of leaving the European Union. And then they went to the local authorities to make sure that they would keep their agricultural subsidies. And I think the response in the Netherlands was very much like, yes, they want to have their cake and eat it, and they're just stupid, and they don't understand what the European Union is about. They're basically the best paid civil servants in the European Union. This kind of response, and what I think as historians and perhaps as social scientists as well, there is a very legitimate and important and urgent question: why is it that these groups of people have voted in favor of leaving the European Union, despite the fact that they have received agricultural subsidies?
Maybe we could ask also Caroline, because I was listening to a very interesting podcast on Business News Radio, a Dutch radio station, and you were on the show, Caroline, and the pundits were slightly more to the right or small government, and they were like nearly praising the whole European project, and I was surprised. And they were also praising the fact that the hate comments had gone down since Trump had disappeared. So I'm asking you, Carolina, what's going on with the people who want to leave the European Union but still benefit from it, or the people who used to preach against the European Union and now embracing it during this crisis? What do you think is going on?
I'm not sure they suddenly embrace the European Union, but I think Carl Bildt once has called this the TBP effect, Trump, Brexit, Putin, something like that. That they realize that Europe is maybe not such a terrible place to live, So it's, as I said also in my column, what you see happening, and I think this is also because of Brexit, we look a little bit in the mirror, we realize much more what we have. I realized what we have when I started living in Norway, ordering things online from the EU. And then you have to pay, Norway is not in the customs union, and then you have to pay suddenly on one book, you pay like 35 euros.
Yeah. So then you
realize what it means to live in the EU, right? Or in the European customs union. Little things that make you realize, okay, so Brexit actually, let's just look in that kind of mirror too.
Yeah, that's a last question.
Maybe not everybody very happy in Europe, but
I have
a little bit more.
One more question here from Nick. He said, could one say that Europe in part became more place-focused than space-focused because of the loss of a vision that people shared initially of a road towards liberty, democracy, economic growth? And could that mean that we should work towards a new shared narrative that newly includes people of all economic classes? That was a column. That was yeah. Who of you would like to answer as final question? Or should we just thank Nick for his contribution?
Yeah, I think it's a
question
suggestion rather than a question.
Yeah,
and of course, as a historian, my question would be: so how do we then get there? And is it actually feasible to arrive at a vision in a European Union that has, enlarged and become so much more diverse? And do we really need one vision and why would we need one vision?
Kees?
Yeah, just what I can add to it. I think the loss of that vision, what Nick is referring to, is also the result of again, that's my point, the fast technological changes that we experience, which turns a lot of things upside down. And therefore, I think it's, for a lot of people, it's not clear where the benefits of these technological changes come and who are paying the costs for it. And therefore, people lose track on democracy, on economic growth, what's in it for me, and so on and so on.
I also wonder, maybe it's a stupid comparison, but I was thinking about, you know, when they were building the cathedrals and they would start building and it would take like 100 years to finish, but everybody was like working on a project that they knew eventually would be something. And I'm thinking about the European Union maybe as a cathedral, and I have a feeling that a lot of people don't really have that sense of belonging, of connection to that project. And I know social sciences and humanities is also about, why is it that people don't have that? What do you think? Why?
Well, I do think that an important, weakness perhaps of the European project has been that, and this is something that Caroline also pointed at, that for a very long time it has not really been possible or accepted to criticize the European project. And if we look at the political parties that were represented in Brussels, in the European Parliament, it was very quickly the case that when you criticized the European community, it was regarded as sort of anti-European integration. And I think that is, if we're looking at sort of promising directions, I actually am quite happy about the fact that it seems that more, more diverse political voices with regard to the benefits and also the disadvantages of European integration have become audible.
Thank you so much. I think we are now officially out of time. I'd like to thank Caroline. I'd like to thank all of you and thank our viewers at home.